Hi, everybody, and welcome back to our study of the road to somewhere. And today we are actually in our second session of what we're calling Season 2 as we continue both down on a journey down Route 66 and through the Bible. This episode, by the way, I'm calling Disaster, and as we move on through the book, I think we'll kind of see how that ties in both to the stop that we make on Route 66 as well as the book of the Bible that we're going to look at that ties into that stop. If you happen to be joining us for the first time, I might just say that really we're trying to accomplish a couple of things in each of these little episodes. One is to actually give you kind of an overview of the story of my book, The Road to Somewhere, which involves, again, a journey down Route 66 with John Calvin, who, again, was the main character in my earlier book, Somewhere Fast, and his partner that is a videographer, Joy Jardine. The two of them are making a series of short videos that tie into a series of lectures of the 66 books of the Bible. And so we're looking a little bit at the story and then a little teaser about the book that would have been part of the video that they were shooting, and then hopefully getting you to go over using the link that's in your email to go over and actually go through the book that we're looking at of the Bible each week. So, disasters. First of all, let's just remember that Season 2, we moved into Missouri. And in Missouri, there will be 12 stops because it correlates with the historical books of the Old Testament that starting with Joshua till Israel's history up and through the destruction of Jerusalem and even the restoration of Jerusalem after its destruction. So each state represents sort of a different piece of the Bible also. And so we're into our second leg or our second season. And as we travel through Missouri again, we're going to have 12 stops. You might remember that last week that John and Joy had crossed the Mississippi River. And when they crossed the Mississippi River, they left Illinois, which was our first leg of the journey in our first season, and have come into the state of Missouri, and the first stop was St. Louis. And it was kind of a fun episode. Again, if you might be joining us or missed our last session, I would encourage you to go back and look at it because it had kind of some personal history in it that I converted into part of the fictional narrative. Now, today, they aren't going to travel far. They're just going to go down the road 17 miles, and they're going to stop at a place where a town once existed, but because of a disaster, the town no longer exists, and that town was called Times Beach. It's really a wild story, and I go into a little bit of it on the main video, and I go into, I think, most of the story in the book. But for those that don't have the book or aren't reading the book, let me just tell you a little bit about what happened here. Back in 1925, a St. Louis newspaper bought a big plot of land on the Merrimack River, which is south of St. Louis. And they came up with this kind of wild marketing scheme, and it was a promotion where for $67.50 you would get a lot there on this land on the river, and you would also get a subscription to the paper. So initially, really what it became is that kind of people that could afford a second home and wanted to have a home on the river, they built up this little town called Times Beach. And then the first disaster, I would say, that happened was that 1929 came along, and the big stock market crash of October of 29, which most would label as the beginning of the Depression. And so during the Depression, a lot of these people lost some everything, and others a lot of their money. And instead of being a town for second summer homes, eventually it sort of transitioned into a place of low income housing. And so that was kind of the first disaster. The second disaster happened in 1972. So people had been living here at Times Beach, and it was a nice little town. And in 1972, the town hired a fellow by the name of Russell Bliss. Now, Russell had a company, and the main purpose of his company was that people that had barns that had dirt floors would hire him to come in and to spray those floors with oil to keep the dust down. Well, Times Beach had dusty, dirty roads, and so in 1972, they decided to hire Russell Bliss to come in and to spray their roads with oil to keep the dust down. What they didn't know was that Russell Bliss had a second business, which was that he had contracted to be a guy that would dispose of toxic chemicals. And what Russell Bliss did with those toxic chemicals was that he mixed them with the oil that he sprayed on places to keep the roads from being dusty. And so that's what happened in Times Beach. He had sprayed all of the roads. They just thought it was that he was using just oil to keep the dust down. And then another disaster came along, and that was that the Merrimack River flooded, and it flooded the entire town of Times Beach. And when the town was recovering from the flood, the EPA came in, and they discovered that the roads had this high levels of dioxin chemical, which is toxic at a certain level, and consequently they condemned the entire town and tore the town down, so that all that remains to this day is a visitor center, and they used the land and turned it into Route 66 State Park. And so Joy and John are going to make a stop here, and this is the visitor center. One of the things, by the way, you can kind of tell that people that take the journey down Route 66 as an adventure oftentimes will drive it in classic cars, so you see a lot of really cool old classic cars along the way. But this is all that really remains of the town. I should say, ironically, you could probably almost consider this another disaster. Later, when they tested the ground there, they came to the conclusion that there actually had not been enough dioxin in the soil to tear the town down, and they wouldn't have needed to destroy the town. But it's gone, and there's a state park there, and all that remains is a visitor center, and it was a site of disasters. So Joy and John in the book decide that they're going to shoot their video for this stop in front of the visitors center. And in the video and in the book, you see this. John tells this story about Times Beach. And then after telling that story, he begins to tie it in with a kind of a quick teaser or overview on the corresponding book of the Bible, which is the book of Judges. And I would have to say, and probably others would come up with some different title or different primary theme, but I think that the book of Judges is a book about disasters. And what we're going to see as we look just a little bit at it today is how over and over Israel made mistakes that led to significant disasters in their history. The book, by the way, covers 400 years of Israel's history, and it starts again with the time of Joshua and goes all the way till the time of Samuel the prophet, which brings us to Saul and David and the beginning of the monarchy. In the book, there are a series of and again, it's a series of disasters. And let me tell you what the book, how it portrays this. There are 7 major cycles in the book. There's actually more short little stories of again, disasters like what I'm going to show you here, but primarily there are 7 major cycles that go on in the book. And the first has to do with the fact that we're simply told that during the lifetime of Joshua, the people stayed faithful to Yahweh, the God of Israel, and they remained a free country, actually a free confederation of sort of a group of tribes, actually. And then when Joshua died, we're told that the Israelites rebelled. And the phrase that appears, which appears often in the Old Testament, is that they did evil in the sight of the Lord. And your English Bible translates it that way. Lord there is actually the word Yahweh, which was the actual name, Old Testament name of God. And so they rebel, and they begin to follow the religions of the Canaanites that remained in the land after the conquest. And this was the very reason why God had given the land to Israel and had used them really to judge the nations that lived there because of the fact that they were followers of Baal and Ashtoreth, which were fertility gods and goddesses, and human sacrifice and child sacrifice was all a part of their religion. And God decided he was going to judge them, and he would use Israel, and then he would give their land to Israel. So after they rebelled, what happened in each of these cycles that you'll see in the book is that God would allow usually a foreign enemy, although sometimes the enemy actually came from within, and there are even parts of the book where tribes would war against each other, but ultimately the enemy would repress Israel, and Israel would become a vassal state of the enemy that defeated them, and they would basically be living in slavery under a foreign invader. And different times in the book, there would be, a different length of time that repression and the rule of an enemy would take place. It might be for just simply a shorter number of years, but sometimes it was rather lengthy number. Ultimately, and this I believe is what God was intending when he allowed them to experience disaster and to be defeated by enemies, foreign enemies, is that eventually the nation would repent. And when they repented, God would raise up a person. It was, other than one instance in which it was a woman, it was men, and they would be like heroes that would lead the nation to defeat the foreign enemy and to bring Israel back into a time of peace and freedom. And those leaders were we call them judges. That's a translation of a Hebrew word, a shaphat, And the word literally means a restorer of righteousness. And they were much different than what we think of when we think of a judge. It wasn't simply someone that heard cases and was more of a legal figure. They were really leaders. They were like sort of a combination of commander-in-chief and leader of the nation, but they would be the one that would lead the armies of Israel, ultimately then to defeat the foreign invader and to restore Israel to a time again of peace and a time of righteousness. Now, this looks like, it would be a good thing. The problem was that in every instance recorded in the book, and again, it's disaster after disaster after disaster, what would happen is that when the judge or the restorer or the hero, however you want to refer to this person, when that leader would die and the next generation would come along, they would rebel again against God. They would begin to worship the gods of the Canaanites, and the whole cycle would start over again. And so as you read the book or as you watch the video, actually in the video, I pull three of the real important judges that whose stories are contained in the book and kind of highlight them. But again, this happened over and over and over again, so that again, in this period of 400 years of their history, it's just, in my mind, as I read it, it's a history over and over and over again of disaster. And finally, what happens, and this is, I think, another purpose of the book, we think actually that these stories that had been collected over the years were probably put together and turned into what we now think of as the book of Judges. It simply would have been a scroll that had all of these stories on it. We think that they were collected by Samuel, who becomes a transitional figure between judges, this time again when Israel was simple a tribal confederacy, and when they became a monarchy. And Samuel was was a prophet, and many scholars believe that he was the one that had pulled all of these stories together into this single scroll or book that we call Judges. And the key, in many ways, 4 different times at the end of the book, but even the very last verse of the book describes this period of time in this way. First of all, here are 7 of the judges of these main cycles. And again, if you watch the video, you will hear some more in-depth stories of several of them that are probably a little more well-known than the others. Obviously, Samson is probably, of all the judges, the best known, but Gideon, pretty well known also, and again, Deborah, who was the only female leader of the nation of Israel. So we have these judges. But the very last verse of the book simply says this: "In those days there was no king in Israel, and everyone did what was right in his own eyes," which, if you think about it, is a formula for disaster. It oftentimes, I've got to say, makes me feel a lot like a description of the days in which we live. But what part of what was being done here, and I think part of what the motivation was of Samuel, was that he's really preparing for the next phase of Israel's history, which is that Israel becomes a monarchy with a human king. Up till this point, God was the king of this, confederacy of tribes, but the people are going to come to Samuel and they're going to say, we want a human king like all of the other nations have, and that will begin another chapter in Israel's history that we'll look at. But in the meantime, just as a little spoiler, in the midst of disaster, there's a short little book that comes after Judges that we will look at next week in episode 3 of season 2, and we'll be in Sullivan, Missouri on Route 66. But the book that we'll look at is the story of a faithful woman in the midst of unfaithful times, and we'll take a good look at that next week. So let me encourage you. You have a link now to the book of Judges, and you can go into that video, which is quite a bit, contains quite a bit more information than the little overview that we've had in this time this morning. So thanks for tuning in. And again, I'm glad that you're joining us on this journey, both down the road and through the book. And we'll see you next week.